High school can be pretty challenging. We've all been there. Some of us are even dealing with it right now. Luckily, there's almost always a teacher we look up to who somehow manages to make the high school experience much more bearable. But did you know this admiration could develop into an obsession, leading to criminal tendencies? Welcome back to Crime Origin. My name is Zach, and today we'll be looking at the story of Ming Sen Shiue, a man who loved his high school maths teacher so much that he kept tabs on her even 15 years after he had left high school. Keep watching to see the story unfold. Ming Sen Shiue was born on the 15th of October, 1950, in his home country of Taiwan. He was the first of his parents' children. In 1958, when Ming was 8 years old, he, along with his parents and two siblings, moved to Minnesota. It was in Minnesota that his father, a professor at the University of Minnesota, died 3 years after they arrived. Now left without a father figure, Ming was later described as being violent towards his younger siblings from adolescence up to adulthood. This violent nature was evident in his teenage years, and he was convicted of criminal activities such as throwing stones at cars and starting fires in people's apartments. Eventually, things got so out of hand that Ming was ordered to undergo mandatory psychotherapy at the age of 14 because of his involvement in arson spread across 3 strangers' apartments. Ming's mother also testified to his uncontrollable behavior, saying that he always persisted in his opinions, even when he was wrong, and took no responsibility for his actions, which made her fearful of him. She described him as having no feelings, like a dog. Like any average teenager in the United States, Ming attended high school between the years of 1965 and 1966. When he was 16 years old, Ming attended Alexander Ramsey High School in Roseville. It was at this school that he met Mary Stauffer, his 9th grade algebra teacher, who seemed to somehow give him something to look up to amidst all the confusion in his life. Soon, things took an awkward turn when Ming began to develop a crush on Mary, to the point that he started having fantasies about her. Although Mary was his maths teacher, Ming soon began to express his feelings for her in more literary than numerical ways. To put that in perspective, Ming wrote stories about consensual sex, rape, and gang rape, all of which had Mary as the leading lady. While these actions would be considered perturbing, the big question is, would this literary outlet for his fantasies be enough to satisfy this teenager's raging hormones? Well, we're about to find out. Ming's obsession with Mary continued long after she stopped being his teacher. In 1975, 10 years after he left the 9th grade, Ming's obsession reached its peak. He discovered a house which he believed was Mary's in Duluth, Minnesota. He broke into the house with a gun, hoping to steal Mary away, but was met with an unpleasant surprise. Upon entering the house, he realized that it was Mary's in-laws and not Mary herself who owned the house. Ming forced the residents of the house to the ground and tied them up. He then threatened to kill them if word of the invasion ever got to the police. His tactic worked, and the crime was not reported until 5 years later, when it seemed necessary to help the authorities solve a kidnapping case, which we'll get to very soon. After the house invasion, Ming continued investigating and searching for his former algebra teacher, Mary Stauffer. His search eventually came to an end in 1980 when he learned that Mary lived on the Bethel University campus. After making this discovery, Ming went on to stalk Mary and her family for months until the 16th of May, 1980, when he decided to put his grand plan into motion. At the time, the Stauffer family was preparing to leave for the Philippines on a missionary journey. In preparation for this trip, Mary took her 8-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, to the hair salon to get a haircut. As the two were leaving the salon after their appointment, they were met by Ming. According to Mary, she initially thought he was seeking directions, but they were soon greeted with a gun and forced into the trunk of Mary's car, which he then drove off in. Both mother and daughter knew not to fight back, but were each very terrified. Who was this man? What did he want? Were they even going to be alive the next minute? These were the questions running through their minds as they lay in the car trunk without a clue of where they are headed. While Mary and Elizabeth were afraid of what might happen to them, they came up with an idea to help them get rescued while they were still on the road. The two began making noises and hitting the car trunk in hopes of attracting a police vehicle or the attention of some other citizens. Realizing what they were doing, Ming stopped the car and walked up to the trunk, where he threatened to kill Mary and Elizabeth if he was pulled over by the police. The journey continued, but Ming soon heard even more noises. He pulled over a second time and came to the trunk to discover that Elizabeth had untied the ropes that he had used to bind her. Just as Ming was confronting them for this, two young boys riding their bicycles came along. One of them, Jason Wilkman, curiously approached the vehicle to see what was happening. While the boy was still stunned at the sight of what he discovered, Ming grabbed him and stuffed him into the car trunk alongside Mary and Elizabeth. He then drove to an isolated area, specifically Carlos Avery Wildlife Refuge in Anoka County, where he took the 6-year-old from the trunk and beat him to death with a metal rod. Mary later testified that when Ming returned to the car, she asked him what happened to the boy, and he said that he had dropped him where he could be found. But Mary knew better than to trust this man. The next time Mary and her daughter would see the light from the outside world when the trunk was opened would be when they arrived at Ming's house. Ming led the two of them to a narrow closet where a blanket and 2 pillows had already been laid out for them, and locked them there. After a while, Ming removed Mary from the closet and brought her to another room where he had set up a camera. He tied her to a piece of furniture and began asking her some questions. During this interview, the now 30-year-old Ming revealed that he had been in Mary's algebra class some 14 years ago. He also claimed that his reason for kidnapping Mary was because she had given him a B- grade, which prevented him from getting into the university and eventually led him to being drafted into the Vietnam War and becoming a prisoner of war, all of which were false. Ming spent several hours trying to convince Mary to fall in love with him, either out of pity or by some other means. Even when his efforts were not yielding fruit, he proceeded to rape her and then kept the woman and her daughter in his custody. Back home, Mary's husband, Irv, and their son were getting worried, and Irv decided to call the police. This report was soon connected to Jason's disappearance, and Mary's car was eventually found sometime later, but there was no sign of her or Elizabeth. The fact that Mary's car was found abandoned in a parking lot dispelled any speculations that she had run away from an abusive home, as was common among women at that time. Instead, it hinted to the authorities at the reality of her being kidnapped. By keeping Mary and Elizabeth around, Ming believed that they, particularly Mary, would soon grow to love him, and they could all live as a happy family. On the 7th of June, 1980, he rented a vehicle and took the two on a trip to Chicago, where he left Elizabeth chained in the back of the van and took Mary out for a date, where they walked around town with his gun keeping her in check and preventing her from alerting anyone. On Father's Day, he rewarded Elizabeth for being a good girl by allowing her to call her father and wish him a happy Father's Day. Judging by the recording of the phone call, Irv did not seem to be under the impression that they had been kidnapped. Instead, he most likely believed that Mary had run off to live with another man, as he asked, "How soon can you come to visit? And can I speak to him?" To which Elizabeth replied, "I don't know," and "No," and then ended the call. On the 4th of July, 1980, about 7 weeks into their abduction, Ming took Mary and Elizabeth to see the fireworks. Before they left the vehicle, he warned them, saying that if they tried anything funny, he would kill them and anyone around. Luckily for the mother and daughter pair, a police car drove by, but they could not alert anyone because of the threats they had received. Instead, Mary memorized the phone number at the back of the car and made Elizabeth do the same when they got home. On the 6th of July, 1980, still wrapped up in his fantasy, Ming has the three of them holding a family game night where he announces that they would soon be moving to a new home, which was very far away. It was at this moment that it dawned on Mary that he was never going to let them return to their family and their lives. She knew then and there that she had to act fast. The next day, while Ming is at work, Mary and her daughter are chained to the locked door of the closet. There, Mary began thinking intently, staring at the door. Desperate to leave before Ming gets the chance to move them far away, the former high school teacher attempts to remove the hinge pin of the door, which came off quite easily, as though it had been greased. Her daughter is not in support at first, still afraid of the threats that Ming had made, but Mary tells her, if God has given us this chance to escape, then we have to take it. Summoning all the courage they can muster, the mother and daughter leave the closet and quickly dial the police number they had memorized a few days ago. Then they left the house and hid behind a car parked in the driveway until the police, who had previously been looking for them as a result of their family's report, arrived and found them there. Ming was arrested at his workplace on the same day and taken to Ramsey County Adult Detention Center. While in detention, Ming offered a fellow inmate, Richard Green, $50,000 to assassinate Mary and Elizabeth to prevent them from testifying against him, and then help him escape from jail. Richard, however, refused and divulged this information to the FBI. Ming eventually underwent 2 trials. The first one was in 1980 and was for the abduction of Mary and Elizabeth and the repeated sexual assault of Mary. As Ming had driven the 2 over state lines, the case was treated under the Federal Kidnapping Act. Eventually, he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, but was eligible for parole after 10 years and mandatory release after 30 years. However, the judge recommended that he serve the complete 30-year sentence. Ming's second trial was for his murder of Jason Wilkman, and it began in 1981. During one of the hearings, he managed to smuggle a knife into the court and attempt to kill Mary using said knife, but only managed to cut her face. It took 62 stitches to close the resulting wound. Refusing to be deterred from his evil mission, Ming promised to kill Mary and Elizabeth when he was released from prison. At the end of the trial, Ming was sentenced to 40 years in prison for the murder of Jason. This sentence was to run alongside his sentence for the kidnapping and rape charge. He managed to escape the first-degree murder charge by agreeing to disclose where he left Jason's body. On the 6th of July 2010, Ming became eligible for mandatory release, but was denied. On the 28th of September 2010, the Anoka County District Judge, Jenny Walker, ruled that Ming could be detained indefinitely as a dangerous sexual predator, even if he was granted parole. Ming appealed this ruling, but was denied, and has since been denied several requests for release by the United States Parole Commission. Despite the trauma Mary and Elizabeth were subjected to at the mercy of Ming, the 2 were able to get their lives back. The Stauffer family eventually went on their missionary trip to the Philippines and have all progressed beautifully since then. Elizabeth went on to get married and start a family of her own, and Mary is now a great-grandmother. The 2 continue to share their story to serve as an encouragement to anyone who might be going through something similar, as well as to ensure that Ming is never allowed to repeat such actions against anyone else. Ming, who is now 71 years old, is still reaping the rewards of his crimes in prison. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to like the video, comment your take down below, and subscribe to the channel. Also, hit that notification bell in order to stay up to date each time we reveal a new shocking case.